low vision or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the April 20th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: Eli Lilly is in advanced talks to acquire Colonia Therapeutics for more than $2 billion, and the deal price could include additional consideration if Colonia reaches certain milestones. The Trump Organization and partners plan to build a roughly 70-story mixed-use tower that would be the tallest building in Georgia's capital, Tbilisi. Trading in treasuries and energy suggests that Wall Street pros monitoring the Iran war don't believe in a return to earlier conditions, whether or not Tehran and Washington sign a peace pact. A judge halted the $6.2 billion merger of Nexstar and Tegna after 8 states and satellite broadcaster DirecTV sued to block the deal on antitrust grounds. Cerebras Systems, a chip startup that makes processors customized for running advanced artificial intelligence models, filed paperwork for an initial public offering. Verizon chief Dan Schulman counseled other CEOs to be candid with staff about the job losses artificial intelligence will cause, saying realism is key to navigating a new world of labor. Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff said AI is making his company more valuable to its customers than ever, despite the steep falls in peers' share prices as the technology becomes more proficient at performing real-world tasks. Now for the highlights under the worldwide section. Vice President J.D. Vance is expected to lead a new round of peace talks with Iran in Pakistan this week, but there still appear to be significant gaps between the sides as the U.S. pushes Tehran to lock up its nuclear program and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. military boarded an Iranian-flagged ship in the Gulf of Oman as it prepares in coming days to board Iran-linked oil tankers and seize commercial ships in international waters. Police in Louisiana pursued and shot dead a man whom authorities said killed 8 children during a domestic dispute in Shreveport. Early results of clinical trials of 2 experimental drugs suggest doctors may be getting closer to addressing a genetic driver of lung cancer that has long lacked targeted treatment options. The Justice Department told French law enforcement that it wouldn't aid efforts to probe X after the platform's Paris office was raided in February. North Korea launched multiple short-range ballistic missiles toward the sea days after a UN warning about Pyongyang's nuclear advances. A civilian was killed and dozens more were wounded in Russian attacks across Ukraine, including one on port facilities in Odessa. The picture on today's front page shows a young man wrapped in the Iranian flag of green, white, and red, with what appears to be a tiger on the white section, as he is watching a huge flag of Iran being paraded down a large city. And that caption reads, "Red, white, and green." Supporters carried the traditional flag of Iran as they marched along Madison Avenue in New York City on Sunday for the Persian Day Parade, celebrating Iranian culture and honoring victims of the government in Tehran. And that headline, New York Parade honors Tehran's regime's victims. Other articles from the front page follow. Big Oil explores farther afield to dodge Middle East turmoil. Iran's attacks on energy infrastructure have sparked a scramble for oil. Exxon, Chevron, and others turn to Africa and South America for next prospects. By Colin Eaton. ExxonMobil, Chevron, and other energy companies are speeding up their searches for new oil and gas prospects far away from the perils of the war in the Middle East. Exxon recently outlined a potential plan to pump as much as $24 billion into Nigeria's deep water oil fields, while Chevron expanded its footprint in Venezuela. BP bought stakes in oil blocks off the coast of Namibia, and Total Energy signed an exploration deal with Turkey. Major oil companies could together create $120 billion in value from their exploration ventures in coming years. Energy research and consulting firm Wood Mackenzie estimated last week. Iran's attacks on energy infrastructure and a shipping bottleneck in the Persian Gulf region have sparked a global scramble for oil and lopped off billions of dollars in revenue for some Western oil companies. But the surge in energy prices is providing the oil industry with a windfall of cash that is expected to help it venture into territories previously out of reach or abandoned years ago. The influx comes after many drillers cut spending on exploration to return more cash to shareholders. Never underestimate the romance of upstream people looking at opportunities. They say, "Boy, wouldn't it be great if we could do this or that," said Edward Chow, a non-resident senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and a former Chevron executive. Now you've got the cash to do it. During a call Thursday with executives from Exxon, Chevron, and other oil companies, Energy Secretary Chris Wright and Interior Secretary Doug Burgum urged them to keep bolstering oil output to counter surging prices ahead of a looming supply shortfall. U.S. oil futures were trading near $90 a barrel Sunday, above the mid-60 range where they were hovering before the war. Prices plunged Friday after President Trump and Iranian officials said the Strait of Hormuz had reopened. Iran later said the strait was closed again. The oil companies want to maximize their production to take advantage of the higher prices, but within the confines of their current budgets and without taking on the added cost of making major investments, people familiar with the matter said. Combined, major oil companies spent an average of $19 billion on global exploration each year from 2021 to 2025, according to Wood Mackenzie. Energy executives also are focused on a longer term mission, finding enough oil and gas to fuel their profits into the 2030s, some of the people said. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz, a critical oil and gas choke point between Iran and the United Arab Emirates, has trapped 20% of the world's daily diet of oil and liquefied natural gas. Analysts said it is doubtful that Western oil companies would sign any major deals in the Middle East until the conflict is fully resolved. Instead, the economic fallout from the war is driving the companies to diversify their portfolios and spread out the risk of disruption across the globe. Energy companies also are trying to boost their reserves. The world's oil producers need to find enough new resources to add 300 billion barrels to their collective reserves to meet global demand through 2050, according to Wood Mackenzie. Exxon, Chevron, Shell, BP, and Total Energies are looking closely at new drilling prospects in Africa, South America, and the Eastern Mediterranean that could refill the reserves for the next decade. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Divides on Strait, uranium imperil Iran talks. Tehran threatens to skip session. U.S. seizes a vessel trying to slip past blockade. Iran's foreign minister is said to aim for normalizing ties with the U.S. By Robbie Gramer, Lawrence Norman, and Somerset. Vice President J.D. Vance is expected to lead a new round of peace talks with Iran in Pakistan this week in a fresh effort to end the war, but there still appear to be significant gaps between Washington and Tehran as the U.S. pushes Iran to lock up its nuclear program and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Vance is expected to arrive in Pakistan on Monday evening for talks with Iran on Tuesday, although Iran was still threatening on Sunday that it wouldn't attend the session, saying Washington's demands remain excessive. Pakistan helped broker a 2-week ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran that expires on Tuesday night. Vance is to be joined by Steve Witkoff, President Trump's Middle East peace envoy, and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, a White House official said. Trump warned on social media Sunday that Iran would face airstrikes that would destroy power plants and bridges if it didn't accept a deal, and he accused Tehran of breaching an initial ceasefire by firing on shipping trying to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Trump has repeatedly threatened to destroy Iranian infrastructure, at one point this month threatening to destroy the country's whole civilization. The president also said the U.S. had seized an Iranian-flagged ship in the Gulf of Oman that attempted to get past a U.S. blockade. The U.S. has previously turned back more than 20 Iran-linked ships that sought to steam past the blockade, but this is the first known episode in which force has been used. Iran's state news agency on Sunday slammed the U.S. side for excessive demands and unreasonable, unrealistic requests, repeated changes in positions, continued contradictory statements. It cited officials saying that no clear prospects for productive talks is envisaged. Iran has made similar threats ahead of participating in the previous round of negotiations. The immediate aim is to agree on some kind of memorandum of understanding, Iranian and U.S. officials have said, which would set the framework for a final, more detailed set of agreements that would be negotiated in coming weeks or months. The U.S. is pushing in the immediate term for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz for commercial shipping, freeze enrichment of uranium for at least 20 years, and agree to remove its stockpiles of enriched uranium. The U.S. also aims to get Iran to curb its missile production and cease funding terror proxy networks in the long term, though those issues aren't a part of the immediate negotiations. Iran has countered with demands of its own, including continued control of the Strait of Hormuz, a full lifting of sanctions, and a shorter suspension of enrichment. Those gaps leave it unclear whether a new round of negotiations, if they take place, will be enough to seal the framework of a deal. A senior advisor to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Tehran said the paramilitary force isn't opposed in principle to a resumption of talks, but it wants Iran to go into those talks with greater leverage. That is why the Revolutionary Guard decided to aggressively restrict shipping again in the Strait of Hormuz this weekend as a retaliation for Trump's decision to continue blockading Iran, the advisor said. An Arab official in the region said the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Arashi is seeking to secure a grand pact with the U.S. that would ultimately normalize relationships between the two countries. The Revolutionary Guard's leadership, though, wants to keep out of the discussions both Iran's military capabilities and its support for affiliated militias across the Middle East. The central issue that has hung over Iranian talks with the U.S. since Trump returned to office last year remains unresolved, officials said. Iran's future enrichment of uranium. The U.S. has pushed for a permanent end to Iran's enrichment program, but last week was open to accepting a 20-year Iranian suspension of the program. For Trump, going any lower would make a deal appear similar to the 2015 nuclear deal reached under the Obama administration that he has long lambasted. That accord prevented Iran from producing enriched uranium above 3.67% for 15 years. Without enrichment, Iran would lose its possible pathway to a nuclear weapon. Tehran says it isn't seeking the bomb. In recent days, there have been public fissures between Iran's civilian leadership and hardliners in the Revolutionary Guard over how much to bend to U.S. demands. On Saturday, the Revolutionary Guard contradicted Arashi a day after the foreign minister's account on X announced the strait was now open. Some people briefed on the negotiations have played down the rifts and say Iran remains open to a deal. America is seeing a stealth boom in manufacturing. Actual factory output has risen briskly and may even be picking up speed, by Greg Ip. You won't hear this from either critics or fans of President Trump's tariffs, but there's a manufacturing revival going on. The reason you haven't heard is that it doesn't easily fit either political narrative. Critics have focused on the fact that factory jobs have steadily slid since Trump took office last year. Unlike jobs, though, actual factory output has risen briskly and may be even picking up speed. This stealth recovery, though, isn't because of tariffs. Instead, credit goes to the most basic economic force of all, demand. The U.S. is good at making things that happen to be in big demand right now. Therein lies a critical lesson in reindustrialization, which has become a bipartisan priority. Governments can help the process along, but that involves painstaking efforts across multiple fronts that, wherever possible, need to move with, not against, market forces. It doesn't mean the indiscriminate application of brute tariff force. First, a few data points. Since January 2025, manufacturing jobs have indeed fallen by about 100,000 workers, or roughly 0.6%. In the same period, though, manufacturing production rose 2.3%, and manufacturing shipments, adjusted for inflation, climbed 4.2%. Yes, these figures are modest and volatile, and it's not like Cleveland suddenly became Shenzhen. American factories are still pumping out less than they did at the start of the global financial crisis in 2007. Yet it is an improvement over the declines of the prior 2 years, and there are signs the recovery may be accelerating. Verizon's leader dials up talks of AI job losses, by Chip Cutter and Patience Hagan. For a big company CEO with big AI ambitions, Verizon's communications Dan Schulman doesn't pull punches about the pain that technology could unleash on America's workforce. Just months into the job, he has predicted 20% to 30% unemployment within the next 2 to 5 years. He warns that advancements in humanoid robots could upend the manual labor jobs still seen as safe today. And he has pushed for more education and reskilling to help workers adapt to the intensifying tech disruption. Coached in the blunt AI talk is a warning for other CEOs. Be candid about the coming disruption or risk a public backlash. It's a very difficult time, and everyone knows it is, Schulman said in an interview. So I think being authentic, being realistic, telling the truth as best you can is key. That belief, he said, is why Verizon created a $20 million career transition and retraining fund for the age of AI when the company began laying off 13,000 workers last year. Change is necessary, but it can be difficult, he wrote to staff then. The warnings are a departure from the messaging of other public company CEOs, many of whom have been bullish about AI's potential to unlock new levels of growth, but demur on or even reject the idea of job losses. A lot of people are saying AI is coming, we're going to run out of jobs. It's exactly the opposite. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang said last month, pointing out that every other technological advancement has brought more productivity and prosperity. Amazon.com CEO Andy Jassy is similarly sanguine about potential job losses to AI. Though some roles will be replaced, there will be other jobs created, he told CNBC in February. In the short term, though, a cavalcade of companies from Snap to Amazon have invoked AI or a desire to find efficiencies as they slash large portions of their workforces. Block, which cut nearly half of its staff, predicted other companies would soon follow suit. A new Boston Consulting Group report predicts that AI will reshape roughly half of U.S. jobs in 2 to 3 years, and that up to 15% of jobs could eventually be eliminated outright. Now for other articles within the paper. Military seizes ship, eyes wider effort by Shelby Holliday, Michael R. Gordon, and Costas Paris. The U.S. military boarded an Iranian flagged ship in the Gulf of Oman on Sunday as it prepares in coming days to board Iran-linked oil tankers and seize commercial ships in international waters, U.S. officials said, expanding its naval crackdown beyond the Middle East. UAE asks U.S. officials about a financial lifeline. Emiratis speak with Treasury and Fed about accessing a currency swap line. By David S. Cloud, Alexander Saidi, and Nick Timiraeus, Washington. The United Arab Emirates has opened talks with the U.S. about obtaining a financial backstop in case the Iran war plunges the oil-rich Persian Gulf state into a deeper crisis, U.S. officials said. The United Arab Emirates Central Bank Governor Khalid Mohammed Balama raised the idea of a currency swap line with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Federal Reserve officials in meetings in Washington last week, the officials said. The Emiratis said they had avoided the worst economic effects of the conflict, but might still need a financial lifeline, the officials said. The talks highlighted the UAE's concern that the war could inflict heavy damage on its economy and its position on a global financial hub, depleting its foreign reserves and scaring away investors who once saw it as a stable and secure place for their money. The conflict has damaged Emirati oil and gas infrastructure and shut off its ability to sell oil using tankers transiting the Strait of Hormuz, depriving it of a source of dollar revenues. Emirati officials haven't made a formal request for a swap line, which would give the UAE central bank inexpensive access to dollars to support its currency or shore up its foreign reserves in case of a liquidity crisis. In talks with the U.S. in recent days, they have portrayed the proposal as preliminary and precautionary, the United States officials said. Missiles launched after UN warning, from the Associated Press. North Korea launched multiple short-range ballistic missiles toward the sea on Sunday, its neighbors said, after the UN's nuclear watchdog warned that North Korea was making very serious advances in efforts to build nuclear weapons. The missiles flew about 87 miles each in a direction toward the country's eastern waters, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said. It said South Korea maintains a readiness to repel any provocations by North Korea. In an emergency meeting of the National Security Council, senior South Korean official expressed concerns about North Korea's repeated ballistic missile tests and urged it to stop them immediately. The U.S. and Japanese militaries also said they detected the launches. South Korea's military was analyzing whether the latest launches were made from a submarine, a land-based launcher, or both platforms, according to South Korean media. If the launches involved a submarine, it would mark North Korea's first submarine-launched ballistic missile test in 4 years. The launches were the latest in North Korea's run of weapons test this year. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, Grocery Socialism in New York City. The mayor rolls out his vision for government Mandani Marts. It took the world decades to conclude that Marxist economics was more Groucho than Caro. Perhaps Mayor Zoran Mandani's experiment in socialism in New York City will shorten that instruction time. Groucho Marx socialism is already on display in the initial rollout of the mayor's plans for city-run grocery stores. Mayor Mandani said last week that the city will build its first store in East Harlem to open by 2029. Estimated cost $30 million. Even in New York City, that cost is out of this world. The city doesn't need to build a store from scratch when space can be refurbished and rented. But the mayor wants a gleaming 9,000 square foot example of what he called the warmth of collectivism in his inaugural address. He wants a store in each of the city's 5 boroughs by the end of his term at an estimated capital cost of $70 million. The plan is for the city to select private operators, albeit with what will be strict rules for pricing and wage rates for employees, unionized, of course, while subsidizing staples like bread and eggs. In other words, price controls. One advantage that government-run operations have is that they can operate with subsidized capital while paying no taxes and no need to make a profit. The city will pick up any rental cost. This means the Mandani Marts will be able to undercut prices at the private grocery stores and bodegas in their neighborhoods. This kind of collectivist competition isn't what the other store owners would call warm. Meanwhile, as Mr. Mandani builds his socialist grocery chain, the city faces huge budget shortfalls. The New York City Housing Authority says it needs $78 billion in repairs, and Metropolitan Transportation Authority another $69 billion. The city budget is estimated to have a deficit of more than $12 billion through 2027, which is one reason Mr. Mandani is begging Albany to raise taxes again. A socialist education is expensive. From the opinion pages, The Algorithm Will See You Now by Andy Kessler. We reduce time to treatment in stroke by over an hour, which is really meaningful. says Chris Mancy, a neurosurgeon and co-founder of Viz.ai. Turns out artificial intelligence is more than vibe coding or summarizing dull meetings. It's also a lifesaver. A stroke can be ischemic, clots blocking the flow of blood to the brain, or hemorrhagic, blood vessels rupturing in the brain. After a hospital stroke team assesses your speech imbalance, they order a CT scan to figure out the cause. Blockages can be treated with TPA medication to dissolve clots, while brain bleeding requires neurosurgery. Time is brain, doctors say. 2 million neurons are lost each minute during an ischemic stroke. AI to the rescue. Dr. Mancy founded Viz.ai in 2016 with David Golan, a machine learning expert who weeks earlier was at Stanford Hospital with a suspected stroke. He saw the problem through the eyes of a data scientist, thinking, how do they not have technology to read these scans? Dr. Mancy says over lunch in San Francisco. Back then, at a typical hospital, workflow was very messy. It was 13 or 14 different calls and handoffs lining up doctors and procedures. For hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, the thickening of heart muscles, it was 56 steps. Viz.ai's process of using AI to create care pathways begins with algorithms that assess scans. By automating many of the next steps, including logistics between doctors and staff, the company shortened initial treatment time by as much as 88 minutes. It also reduced treatment time variability from 2 hours to 7 minutes. Each patient is getting treated faster but more consistently as well. In 2018, Viz.ai was the first to get Food and Drug Administration clearance for AI system use in healthcare. It took some education, Dr. Mancy recalls. They thought it was for helping the radiologist. But if you want to help the patient, you can't just help the radiologist or the neurosurgeon, the individual doctor. You have to help the entire workflow. It's a system problem. And once we explained that, they realized this was good for American patients. Viz.ai ran clinical trials, many of them in the Southeast, a region known as the stroke belt for the disease's high prevalence. After FDA approval, hospitals in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Atlanta rolled out Viz.ai's platform. It is now in 2,000 U.S. hospitals covering 230 million people, about 2/3 of the American population, and 35 hospitals in Europe. Business is growing 40% a year. By solving the workflow efficiency problem, we create high agency doctors, Dr. Mancy says. 20% of the problem is detecting disease. 80% is organizing the workflow so the patient gets to the right specialist to diagnose and see the patient. Viz.ai creates an AI care pathway that takes a patient from initial tests all the way through to definitive treatments. It isn't an AI doctor, but you've got the world's best fellow working for you all the time. Selling any software to hospitals is hard, so Viz.ai set up a platform to handle issues beyond stroke care. We have 55 pathways available for different treatments, Dr. Mancy says. including pulmonary embolism, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and cancer. 35 to 40 of those are from other companies, including Microsoft, that have come to us and said, hey, can you deploy this detection algorithm into your health system? Hospitals have rules set up. We implement them into the software. Here's where it gets really interesting. The platform's inputs are imaging of any type, ECG, heart tracing, echocardiograms, blood test, labs, genetic test, and importantly, the electronic health record. Dr. Massey says, a year and a half ago, every single care pathway that we built was imaging based as a trigger. An AI scan of an image would set a patient on a treatment plan. This year, 90% of our care pathways that we've launched have been electronic health records triggered. Could this mean earlier detection before symptoms? We're now doing probably 90% of the work of the doctor automatically, before the doctor's even seen the patient, which is magical for that doctor because they come in, everything's organized for them, Dr. Massey says. So the AI does 90% of the grunt work? He nods, but not the word I'd use. We're giving them guidelines and they're deciding. We've not had one complaint. Viz.ai is working with Anthropic and talking to OpenAI and others. Claude means we can now synthesize a 90-page electronic health record and get the signal. And that allows us to expand the number of diseases to really every single disease. The goal is to head off harm by finding a disease before it causes symptoms. It fits into the narrative that should be told more, which is an AI for good. There are AI competitors like AI Doc, which started with pulmonary embolisms, and Open Evidence, which doctors use to help diagnose diseases. The more, the better. Dr. Massey is thinking about the big picture. The agentic evolution is doing more work for doctors, nurses, and administrators. It's all the different tasks they do, because if you can take some of the burden off them, more patients are treated. Their economics get better, and patients get better. That's my big focus. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The Trouble in Trump's Venezuela by Mary Anastasia O'Grady. Does Rodriguez want change, or is she intent on preserving the socialist dictatorships? Is Venezuelan dictator Delcy Rodriguez Washington's woman in Caracas, as the Trump administration claims? Or is she a Chavista stand-in for former strongman Nicolas Maduro, intent on preserving the socialist dictatorship? Every day, the latter looks more plausible. President Trump can still do something about it, but time isn't on his side. Ms. Rodriguez told the nation in an April 8th economic speech that to fight inflation, she will approve only a responsible minimum wage increase on International Workers' Day, May 1st. Coming from a communist, that seems like a courageous step toward common sense reform. But don't get too excited. What matters to Ms. Rodriguez is her survival, and for that she needs the backing of the criminal insiders who run the country. She continues to nurture them. After the U.S. military captured Mr. Maduro in January and brought him to New York to face drug trafficking charges, Mr. Trump approved Mr. Maduro's deputy, Ms. Rodriguez, as interim head of state. The goal was to preserve the chain of command in law enforcement and the military and avoid chaos. But Mr. Trump was emphatic that the U.S. would run the country. More than 100 days into Ms. Rodriguez's new job, freedom is still a dirty word for the government. According to Foro Pino, a Venezuelan non-governmental organization that monitors the criminal justice system, the regime holds 477 political prisoners, including 187 members of the military. Many of those who have been released are under gag orders. The amnesty law passed by the National Assembly in February is a fraud. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado is under threat of arrest if she returns to her country. Even if American policy makers don't care about human rights, civil liberties, or democracy, the risks to U.S. security interests posed by a regime with a record of working to destabilize the Western Hemisphere can't be denied. Ms. Rodriguez mouths some of the right lines about the importance of oil and gas and mining and cutting red tape. But talk is cheap, and the cancer of collectivism has metastasized throughout the economy. The country needs an overhaul of regulation, labor law, and the central bank. Ms. Rodriguez, who was a major player in the repressive Maduro regime and was subjected to sanctions by the first Trump administration in 2018, is part of the problem, not the solution. In January, Secretary of State Marco Rubio proposed a three-phase strategy for Venezuela: stabilization, recovery, and transition to democracy. Phase 1 has been all upside for Ms. Rodriguez. The U.S. decision to lift its ban on Venezuelan oil exports has sent hard currency revenue flowing back to Caracas, albeit under U.S. control. The economy is forecast to grow 4% this year. The recovery phase, now underway, requires a meaningful change of personnel. But so far, there are no signs that Ms. Rodriguez is on board. Quite the opposite. Her new defense minister is a former head of the shadowy intelligence agency responsible for untold human rights violations. The former defense minister, a Putin ally, has been tapped to run agriculture. Diosdado Cabello, who is under U.S. indictment for drug trafficking, remains Interior Minister. The paramilitary, known as the Collectivos, still roam the streets as Bolivarian enforcers. The best Ms. Rodriguez could do at the central bank, which generated 475% inflation last year, was replace the president with the vice president. Last week, Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control eased sanctions when it issued a new general license to let U.S. persons engage in dollar transactions with some Venezuelan state financial institutions. Venezuela has made almost no political concessions in return. Ms. Rodriguez gets along well with Chevron, which has a history of lobbying the Trump administration for special licenses to work with the dictatorship. The American oil company stayed in Venezuela in 2007 after other big players left and is pouring more capital into the country. but most investors are holding off until they see real reform. In her April 8th speech, Ms. Rodriguez acknowledged the economic collapse that led to the mass emigration of both the Venezuelan professional class and the poor. But did that have anything to do with the confiscation of private property and independent media, central bank incompetence, the politicization of the national oil company, gross corruption, rampant crime, or the government's use of food as a political weapon? Not in her narrative. The late dictator Hugo Chavez fought for social justice, but his project came undone as a consequence of U.S. sanctions, she explained. The blame lies with the blockade, the term Cuba uses for sanctions. She demanded all be lifted. Ms. Rodriguez recognized that hyperinflation has destroyed Venezuelan living standards. 2 cheers for that. But if the leader of the recovery continues to parrot socialist bromides and surround herself with other thugs, there's not much hope for the future. A Victory in Iran Won't Look Like One by Holman W. Jenkins, Jr. A stock market chart from the start of this year is pretty dramatic. A sharp crevice comes a month into the Iran war, but it's only been up since then, and now the market is higher than when the war started. The market can only discount information it has, but it clearly has discounted the claim that Iran achieved victory by tying up the Strait of Hormuz. I've had my own complaints with Donald Trump's war. No plan survives contact with the enemy. The Trump addendum, then why a plan at all? But let's also admit that his latest way of testing the patience of global oil consumers is so far going swimmingly. The U.S. is implicitly pointing a gun at the ships of any country that enter and exit the ports of Iran, or that pay Iran a toll for passage through the strait no matter which country's ports they visited. The hope was that ships wouldn't test the U.S. Navy, and they haven't, sparing the U.S. the hassle of managing commandeered vessels and their crews, or any confrontations with semi-friendly powers like China or India. An Iran that can't get its oil out will soon exhaust its domestic storage capacity, risking permanent damage, for technical reasons, to its wells by shutting them in. No wonder word came Friday of Tehran hustling out a promise to stop its own blocking of shipments in the Gulf. So far, so good. But Mr. Trump also wants a nuclear deal, even if it's far from clear that one would be necessary or useful rather than merely face-saving, given the destruction already done to Iran's nuclear sites and the ability of the U.S. and Israel at any time to return for more. The way to deal with proliferators, it should be understood by now, is not to bargain. It also takes a special kind of leverage to get a regime like Iran's to cut its own throat, which is what Mr. Trump is asking. That's not what he asked of Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela. She didn't have the option of invading the U.S. to retrieve Nicolas Maduro, only the option of becoming Venezuela's new president and top dog as her country benefits from repaired ties with the U.S. Mr. Trump wants a deal, judging by the size and character of their delegation to Islamabad. Iran's regime survivors want a deal. But don't expect a big, beautiful one of Mr. Trump's promise. Don't expect a deal that, in the administration's words, represents Iran crossing a golden bridge to a new future. If oil is flowing again, Mr. Trump perhaps should be happy with the military success he already has. Iran's Hormuz vulnerability now has been exposed. Its oil can't exit, its imports can't enter, including the millions of tons of construction supplies it will need to rebuild its battered infrastructure. Iran will also need financing, yet its wealthy neighbors are more interested in Iran proofing their own economies. See Saudi Arabia's $250 million rail and pipeline project to bypass the Persian Gulf. Tehran faces a choice: the economic abyss or making peace with its U.S. allied neighbors. There's little hope of attracting investor confidence, realistically Chinese, if Iran can't assure its own access to world markets while it threatens others. But the next hurdle I wouldn't hold my breath for: what J.D. Vance calls a grand bargain, not a small deal with the mullahs. Does the Trump administration even need a clean ending? History says no. The Iraq and Afghanistan wars of Mr. Trump's predecessors weren't fatal to their political interest, even as these wars went awry in ways Mr. Trump's Iran adventure hasn't yet. Afghanistan went on for 20 years. Mr. Trump's war is looking like a bargain in comparison, and by certain measures, even a victory. But Mr. Trump craves a deal. The question is academic because he won't act on it. But if it came to his threatened attacks on Iran's oil industry, would this really be a catastrophe for the Iranian people? Under both the Shah and the mullahs, Iran is Exhibit A for what economists call the resource curse. Nothing in the cards suggests much improvement as a result of the current war. The U.S. might do better to move on. Which brings me to a final point. The Persian Gulf closure is a sudden energy shock. A slower moving shock in the opposite direction is a world getting over its energy and climate delusions. Norway is drilling enthusiastically again in the North Sea, uncovering large new deposits of oil. For reasons indistinguishable from mental illness, the UK still won't. Germany is saving its coal and nuclear plants. Canada is building pipelines again and making peace with its oil sands. The best way to weaken the world's oil tyrants is for responsible countries to give them competition. The Pepper and Salt cartoon shows a young man trying to get rid of his fast food dishes and goes to dump them in a bin with 4 compartments labeled recycle, landfill, compost, and the 4th one, unsure, try again. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 20th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening.